Welcome everyone to Tea and Chocolate, and my guest today is Andrea Menard, who is a member of the Metis Nation of Canada, and she's a performer and speaker, and she's also the founder of Sacred Feminine Leadership Lodge. And before Andrea introduces herself, I'd like to acknowledge that we are operating on the unceded ancestral and traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples. Thank you, Andrea, for being here with me today. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, Lauren. I'm honored.
Yes. Yeah, I was saying earlier in private how much I really appreciated your website and all the beautiful offerings that you have as a performer and as a storyteller. So yeah, you're welcome. So I'm really excited about you sharing yourself today. So thank you again.
I'm honored to be here. And now this is the tea and chocolate, my two favorite things. You know, this is a podcast about courage, yeah?
Yes.
I like that.
Those are two of my favorite things too. Those are like daily medicine things that I have.
Tea, chocolate, and courage.
Yeah.
me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you're welcome to start at, Andrea has a TEDx talk, which I encourage everyone to listen to because it's a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Yes, and there's a story there if you'd like to start sharing.
I guess about courage.
Yeah.
Because it did require a lot of courage.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, my TEDx talk is called Silent No More, Using Your Voice to End Violence Against Women. And it was done here at the TEDx Stanley Park, which was at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, 2,500 people. And I would say that this topic, this subject, wasn't a subject that I went in wanting to talk about. It was a subject that chose me.
Really?
And when you think of things like, you know, when there's a movement happening on the planet, you know, sometimes you're just called to be a part. And at the time, the Me Too movement had either just happened or hadn't happened yet. Maybe it hadn't happened yet. And also there were talks about the national inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Right. So, you know, there was pregnant change happening. And of course, I am an Indigenous woman and I have experienced sexual violence as a young girl. And of course, as an adult, you know, I mean, just everyone I know has been touched by violence. So here was this movement wanting to find its voices. and here I was, you know, planning to speak on, you know, using your voice, but not recognizing that my doorway into that topic was sexual violence and how I lost my voice as a singer and an actress and all these things that I am now. My voice is everything to me. But at the time, having lost my voice because of losing my self-esteem, losing my ability to stand up for myself. So this topic chose me, and as much as I fought it, I finally surrendered. And when I surrendered to what the topic was going to be, it was a very powerful thing to share. A very powerful thing and a very courageous thing to share. I went through all the fear all over again, the shame, the burning lump in my throat, everything came back, you know, 25, 35 years later. And I was meant to experience all that so I could share it with others, so that I could remember what it felt like and work through it again so that this talk would touch people in a big way.
That's incredible. I can't imagine that.
Well,
yeah, I can't imagine that. So tell me something. Is your does your culture, does the Métis culture, did that help you sort of come to some sort of resolution within yourself, or healing for that matter?
I think so, but you know. Absolutely. Like I had avenues, not immediately, because I just went inside. I just didn't tell anyone and I swallowed it all and it just went into a faraway place, you know?
Right.
So when we do that, you know, and I think that is what I think women are trained to do that culturally, as well as, you know, people from outside of my community. All women are trained to keep things quiet, which
Sure.
is why it's such a global movement or a planetary movement.
Yes.
Um, but for me, I did go quiet and I did go silent for many, many years. But I did have tools when I started to awaken and I started to open up and wanted to be a better, I wanted to act, I wanted to sing, I wanted to use my voice, what I came here to do. But I could tell that I had all of these blockages and all of these things on top of this pure voice that wanted to come through. And when I started to want to open those up, because it has to come from me, it has to come from me first, the person who, you know, my healing starts with me and I made the choice. So when I started making those choices, I had tools within my community. I had elders and I had places to go and I had friends and I had avenues and I had cultural practices that help us, you know, ceremony.
Do you still, like, where are you? What's your relation to what happened with you today as you still sort of see it affecting women on the planet?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is, change can only happen for me. This is what I believe. Change can only happen when one person at a time chooses the healing path.
Mm-hmm.
And so women, women from my community, absolutely. We've got women who've been on the front lines for a long time, who have been rallying for Indigenous women and girls to be seen and noticed, and for this pandemic of, sorry, that's a different word now, but this epidemic of women going missing from
Right.
our community, it just had to be stopped. So there have been people fighting to be heard for years and years and years. And of course, there's been a rise in consciousness, there's been a rise in people taking notice. And it does help that women from all nations are calling for this same movement. So when the Me Too movement happened, it helped lift the status of the fight that Indigenous women have been fighting for. So I forget your question. I'll give you the backstory. Like, what did you
It's just
say?
sort of, you've actually answered it in terms of how your experience, how you feel about your experience in terms of how this is still continuing on,
Hmm.
like on
Okay, I did have a
this
comment to that
point.
actually.
Yeah.
So the fact that, you know, it is so prevalent
Mm.
in our communities and in all communities, you know, sexual violence has been normalized. And that is something that I feel very strongly about, because my work is the Sacred Feminine Learning Lodge. And I'm all about expressing the teachings that I heard from an elder who held an elders gathering in 2012. And they said in their message to the world was, now is the time of the rise of the sacred feminine. And that was huge for me, because I had been living that life. All the work I'd been doing had been probably uh, moving that movement along. But
Right.
when they said it, it was like bells went off in my head. I went, that's what I do. Yes, I'm an actor. Yes, I'm a singer. Yes, I'm a speaker. Yes, you know, I'm a messenger and an ambassador. But everything I do is about the rise of the sacred feminine. So to me, the ending violence against women is definitely in that wheelhouse for me. Because, and to explain to me what the rise of the sacred feminine is to me, and to what I understood this elder to say from the Turtle Lodge in Saugeen First Nation, they, you know, to me, the rise of the sacred feminine is the rise of women's voices, the rise of feminine knowledge, the rise of the environmental movement,
Mm.
the rise of nurturing men, the
Uh-huh.
rise of the trans and two-spirited and queer community who are, and the rise of the Indigenous voice, the rise of the Black voice, the rise of people of color, everything that has been left out of these masculine systems that rule the world. It's time to come home and back to the circle. To me, that is what the rise of the sacred feminine is.
Mm.
And so I am deeply entrenched in that facilitation.
Wow. Yeah, that's quite incredible. That's a lot.
Hmm.
Like it's
But
all,
it's happening,
yeah,
whether we believe in it or not, right? You can see that it's happening.
yeah, yeah. Um, uh, when it comes to, like, for years now, well, for the past few years, I guess we've been hearing more and more and learning as Canadians about the, our Canadian history regarding the residential schools.
Mhm.
And I'm actually in the midst of doing a course with the University of Alberta. So I just do it bit by bit because it is so intense. I could probably start like from start to finish. When I end, I'll probably have to do it again because there's so much information. And then you start kind of cluing in and going, oh, okay. It's very interesting, and disturbing at the same time.
Good for you, by the way.
Yeah,
Well done.
yeah,
Yay.
yeah, I'm passionate about it actually. I'm not sure why, but I'm really really wanting to know because I think when COVID actually hit too, I was like, let's put the brakes on. What's actually going on here? And how can we be more self-reliant? How can we honor who we are here as peoples in Canada? And we need to stop giving our country away, period. So, so that's my own kind of thing. But anyway, going back to the residential schools and sort of the systemic things within the, Métis and First Nations and Inuit cultures, why is there's this focus of the killings of the Indigenous women? Like, I don't understand that. And they also go very little, like, unreported. It's almost like it's very silent.
Oh,
And
they got reported. They just didn't get picked up by media, by police. It just wasn't.
right, so
Yeah.
okay, right. And why is that? Like, is that racism in your opinion?
Oh, yeah. To
Okay.
me, the founding of this country was based on racist principles, of white supremacist principles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's the system in place. And that is what our settler brothers and sisters brought with them, because that is the colonization system. Most people that came here were colonized at some other part in their history. So that has been passed on and passed on and passed on, this system of, it's a hierarchy that some people live at the top
Mm-hmm.
and a lot live at the bottom. And so when you come here believing that you have a right to conquer people, that you have a right to take lands that don't belong to you, when you have a right, you think you have a right to save people with your idea of God and religion. If you come with that and you believe it with all of your heart and soul,
Mm-hmm.
then you feel you have the right to do unspeakable things in the name of what's right. And that is unfortunately what the colonization model is all about, is land, conquer, destroy what exists there and make it your own. That's the whole process. And it's happened all over the globe, and including your ancestors. It's just that it's farther back. So it is a racist and outdated and system that has just been done. And we are so done with it. So when you come to this land and you see, or you don't see, structures that look like yours, you don't see governmental systems that look like yours, you don't see spiritual practices that look like yours, you think they don't exist. You think they are primitive, instead of seeing it through, look how healthy the land is and the water is. Look how these people respect each other. Look how they welcome us. Look how their systems of government are both matriarchal and patriarchal. They work together. But if you are blind to seeing, from what you see is primitiveness instead of maybe an enlightened society, you can't see it because you come from this place. So
Right.
those systems saw, for Indigenous people, our women and men were equal. We were a circle. We had a circular culture. So when the settlers came with patriarchal views, they didn't want to speak to women. They went, boy, these men give their women a lot of power, and and things like they would start and they would actually create systems where they would talk to the men and not talk to the men unless the women left, or things like that. So all of a sudden this egalitarian, or whatever that word is,
Yeah.
these circular structures were being broken down from the beginning when negotiations were trying to be put in place. So women seen as less than was brought with the settler culture. And of course, when you see Indigenous people as primitive, as less than, as someone to be conquered, that is prevalent within the culture, that in the conquering of Canada, in the whole system that is in place in what we call Canada today, that belief structure that we are less than, that Indigenous people are less than and primitive and on the level of animals, that gives that you permission to do unspeakable things, because the systems of retribution don't happen. Consequences don't happen like they do if a white woman was harmed. So it's built in. It is built into the structure. And for us to bring awareness to it is one thing, but when other people from your community start to see and break down those structures and to, just take the blinders off, when you see that that's where it came from, it's a remarkable thing to unravel. And it's very important to unravel.
So are you actually saying then that if I had also experienced sexual assault, I would get treated differently than, say, you would?
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah. Now, remember, I also have, I'm a Métis person. So First Nations people who are visibly, and Métis people, all Indigenous people who have a visible presence, Indigenous presence. I can be white presenting, so that also gives me an advantage, and I am very aware of that. It gives me a privilege. But my sisters and brothers who are very Indigenous presenting, with darker skin, they will have they have been ignored for decades. I have one sister of mine who has started the Butterflies in Spirit dance troupe. Okay. Her auntie in 1995, I could get this wrong and I apologize, but her auntie went missing in 1995. She wasn't reported missing until 2006. Because they thought, oh yeah, sure, she just ran off, she just did this. So, when the family members came and kept coming and saying, my sister, my auntie is missing and we're worried about her. And instead oh yeah, she probably just ran off. There's no alarm sounded, there was no media alert, there was no people on the ground looking for her. And she was one of the people that went to the farm, shall we say. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We won't mention his name because we don't need to mention this.
No.
Predator's name. Yeah.
No. Are these sort of imbalances in the healthcare and with the RCMP? Because I keep hearing it from the RCMP. Are these imbalances in those systems, in the healthcare system as well?
Oh, absolutely, in the healthcare system. Absolutely. Yep. People have been turned away. People have, it's prevalent everywhere. It's right. And because of these unconscious bias, people think that they're doing the right thing. People think that they are behaving in a way that is acceptable, because Indigenous people are seen as less than and not worthy of, or their ways of living, they're drunk, they're this, all of these beliefs can make them write off what they believe to be true.
So within your communities, what's the answer? Right now, if you think about, let's stick to, your story as well. I'd like to, stay integral to your story, Women of Violence, and in terms of how we stop the and we get all involved in that, but how we stop these, what's the word that I want? These situations, the repeated patterns, I guess, of violence towards your community.
Well, the truth is, it starts in your community.
Aha.
Starts in your community.
Okay.
We can heal all we want, and we are. We have miracles happening in our community, and we have people rising up and creating movements. But if no one else cares,
Mm-hmm.
then the violence will continue. If your community doesn't get outraged by it,
Mm-hmm.
or shocked at the genocide that has happened to our people,
Uh-huh.
then it will remain the same. So my beautiful white settler sister right here, this conversation and you caring and sending it out to your community is a very big deal. It matters, because just like you'll see in the Black Lives Matter, in the movement down in the States, is, you know, the Black community can heal and shout and scream and riot all they want, but if everyone just thinks, oh yeah, that's them doing it again, if nobody cares and nobody sees through the racial bias and the stereotypical, oh, that's what they do, oh, the Indigenous are just complaining again, if they can just close the door on our shouting and our screaming and our rioting and our posts and our anger and our taken to the streets, if you can just, you know, if your media can just go, oh, they're doing it again, and then you have an excuse to just close the door and not listen until something like that video of George Floyd happens, where you go, how is that possible? Finally, you see the reason why we've been shouting and screaming and yelling and taken to the streets and angry. All of a sudden you have a really good window why that your media hasn't been telling you. Mm-hmm. So this podcast is wonderful because you're taking upon in yourself to educate others, including yourself. And that to me is where the real change is going to happen, when we work together on this.
Well, for me, like as an onlooker, an observer, as a citizen of the world, like I'll call it that. Like as an interviewer, I kind of say, okay, well, am I really supposed to give out like an opinion, right? Because at the end of the day, it's like I try and figure out what, you know, the narrative, the full narrative of any sort of story, right? And certainly I don't doubt your narrative by by any stretch of the imagination. But when the Black Lives Matter situation came forth, there were Indigenous women that were killed during that time that our media did not pick up. So I found that
you froze there.
Oh, can you see me? Okay, you there? Excellent. Okay, so
yeah, you froze, but I did hear it.
yeah, that's okay. Yeah, okay. I know that our media didn't pick up the fact that there were 6 Indigenous women. I learned this in Canada that died at the same time, and it didn't get the value it required in addition to the Black Lives Movement, right? And so I'm not really interested in so much about the rioting, because the rioting is a whole other monster out there. But I am interested in bringing these matters forth and unraveling all these things, going, why is this happening? Why do we have, right now, I'm talking to you, and I'm saying, and I'm interested in going, why is this happening in Canada? Why has the government or our education systems or our healthcare systems, whatever it is, that we are ignoring this topic, this issue, right? To me, it's mind-boggling, because to me, I don't think like that, right? And so when the words like white supremacy, white privilege, white fragility, and all these things that have just taken on a whole new meaning, I don't relate to it. Do I think I'm privileged? Yes, I have a home, I have food, I have family, I have friends, from that perspective. And then I've got to dismantle, well, okay, so I've come from, my parents are European, and they came after the Second World War. They do not feel privileged. They work really, really hard. So I spoke to them about this. I said, so do you feel privileged? You know, in any kind of way. I go, this is what's happening. I go, but do you feel, he goes, well, no, because I've worked so hard. So I'm, yeah, you know, so it's really, I think that's a big conversation to have. I'm fascinated by it though, because we still have, because I, growing up in East Vancouver, I know that we do not value the Indigenous culture. I know that we don't.
Mhm.
Like I
Mhm.
just, by being, by being in a community that I don't see any Indigenous people.
You know, one thing,
Mm.
if there's one thing that I can respond to about that, you know, about people like your parents and people say,
Yes.
but I don't feel privileged. I work hard. I've struggled. I've had major bad things happen to me, right?
Yes.
That is real. And that's, you know, I get that. You
Yes.
know, no one necessarily has the easy life. But what we ask you and your parents to understand is that you may not have had an easy life, but you did not have the color of your skin adding to the struggle. So imagine that an equivalent of my Indigenous relatives, they also worked hard and struggled to make a living. But because of the color of their skin and because of the prejudice against them, they didn't necessarily get the jobs that your grandfather would have got. In fact, your grandfather would have got the job that my grandfather couldn't get because he was Native. You see? So all
Yes.
of a sudden that his struggle is a little bit better than our struggle because of the color of our skin and the people we were. You know, if a lot of Métis people, you know, struggle with the historical is that if you said you were Métis, you didn't get a job. So if you said you were French, we're French, you could get a job. So all of a sudden now you have a split within communities of saying, oh, you know, we just got silenced at the resistance. You know, we were shut down by the Canadian government, and now we have to pretend that we're not who we are in order to survive in this country. That is struggle that your grandparents didn't have to have here.
Right. 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 Yeah, it's taken me back to my grandparents actually, and my parents really looking at that going, how is their situation different than, you know, with the Indigenous community?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else before we carry on and really delve into your own personal work in terms of being an artist and performer? Is there anything else that you wanted to just to sort of share on the things that we've just been talking about before
Yeah,
we leave it?
maybe one more thing is, you
Yes.
know, one thing that um, you and many women can understand is that ending violence against women
Yes.
isn't ended by women.
Aha.
Who's perpetuating the violence?
Right.
So the conversation and the blinders have to come off, and the conversations and the wake up call has to come from the male community, has to come from our men. Women can heal all they want, women can rise up, and women can write, but if the violence still continues, women are still the ones perpetuated against.
Yes. Very, very
See the
good point.
parallel. See the
Yes.
parallel.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the one thing I've been thinking about is that we how do we raise our boys then? That's the big question. And then it's how do we raise them? And then at what point do they decide to choose, violence? Like, why do they violate a woman? And uh, I'm wondering where the missing gap we have is, because I'm told as a woman, I can't walk down the alley in the dark or walk in a forest for fear of being hurt by a male,
Mhm.
regardless of what their color is. It doesn't matter. Like,
Mhm.
I'm not looking for that. It's like, okay, and I do have this fear. So the question is that why are we like, where does that even start?
Well, again, the systems, remember these systems that is brought over is that men, white males are at the top of this pyramid and everyone else is below. So to me, in order to find hope in this world, it's like people are not necessarily bad. Systems are that train people. Systems are broken. Systems are flawed.
Mhm, mhm.
Oh, they're sophisticated. Don't think they're not working. They are, but they need to be dismantled by people who say, this doesn't work for everyone, so I'm not following it anymore.
Right, right. Well, thank you for this.
Hmm. You're welcome.
When it came to a place of you speaking about, being violated, and I always think there has to be something inside you to finally find your voice and say, this is what I'm going to talk about. What made you actually finally like speak out? Because that is very difficult to reveal about yourself.
Like I said, the topic chose me. And
Yes, yes.
yeah, that chose me. So
Yeah,
I was already booked to do this TED Talk, and I couldn't back out now. So I went,
yeah.
and I had to keep writing it. And I wanted it to be a good TED Talk. I wanted it to say what I needed to say. I needed to mention the rise of the sacred feminine. I needed to talk about voice, but I also needed to talk about reclaiming voice, and that how it's our responsibility to use our voice to end violence. And women, we have to use our voice, but men have to join the conversation too. So it was
Right.
just something I had to do. It was just something, it was like another gig that that tore me open. And because this is about courage, everything that I've done in my career has demanded something from me, has
Right.
asked me to overcome something that has debilitated me, that would have kept me where I was. But I say that I've got really bossy grandmothers, and my ancestral grandmothers guide me, and they're really loud. So when I have a voice that my elders say the grandmothers gave me that voice, and I have to use it. So if I've been given this voice that people like, singing voice and speaking voice and acting chops, if I've been given these gifts, then it's my responsibility to use them. And if I don't, then it's the consequences for me. My grandmothers are very loud. I came here with a purpose, and I'm here to follow through on that purpose.
Are you, when you say grandmothers, are some of them also passed on to the other side?
Well, they're all on the other side.
Oh, they are. Oh, okay.
They're my
Okay.
ancestral guidance.
Right, right, right. Okay. I know that I was reading on your website that I love this. You come from a lineage of, like, as a songkeeper.
Mm,
Can you
mm.
speak on that?
Well, I have to say that is, I do come from a long lineage of songkeepers, but I don't think we use that word. That word came and it was whispered to me,
Oh,
uh, because for me, I grew up in this culture of music. Music is, Métis people are music is a big part of our lives. Fiddle tunes, guitars and singing, dancing. It's a big part of our culture. But as a singer-songwriter who went into this industry of the music industry, I just sort of followed my heart and wrote what I wanted to write. But I sort of fit in and didn't fit in throughout my whole career. And it wasn't until I had another breaking open, breakdown, break open, whatever, they're all the same. Whenever I went through one of those, I recognized, or afterwards, I started to become very, very sensitive to music and to the lineage of music and to the creators of that particular song, especially lyrics. And I realized that most lyrics and most songs were written with revenge, lust, greed, victimhood, all of this stuff that does not empower us. And I was so sensitive to it. I couldn't hear, I just shut music out of my life because I went, ugh. And it was during this time that I got messages from the grandmothers, and I actually got the bit of a story. And I wrote this story, actually. It's not been released yet, but it's called The Awakening of the Songkeepers. And it's all about a change happening in my ancestral heart, realizing that I, as a singer-songwriter, and as the term songkeeper, as a songkeeper, I have a responsibility to uplift the people. It's my responsibility. If I was given these gifts, the people of the old, the songkeepers of the old, or the storytellers of old would have been trained for that role, would have given the honor of sharing songs and sharing stories with the people. And they traveled with them. In Europe, you had traveling minstrels or whatever that role was. You also had people who were trained to bring stories and teachings and songs to your communities in your land. which I also have European ancestry too. But in this land, you know, the storytellers earned that. They had showed signs of gifts, and then they were taught the stories of the people, were taught the songs of the people, and they were that was a honored role to have. So now if you think of today, there's all of us singer-songwriters just spewing out our pain, which is okay for our own healing, and maybe it's okay for the where we were at, but when are we going to be responsible again for what we give to our nations, what we give to the people? We as songkeepers, we as songwriters have a responsibility to help uplift our brothers and sisters. And that's where, to me, the wake-up call was I have a responsibility, and I'm not necessarily taking that up. So that was a big change in my life, big change.
Wow, that's very powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, and I guess that also, you know, then it starts to have the onus on the listener too, is what are you going to start asking for? Why don't you ask more of your songkeepers and your singer-songwriters? Ask more of them. They're the gifted ones. Ask that they bring you enlightened, you know, uplifting, positive messages for your own growth. Demand more from us. It's on you too.
How do you feel that you've evolved throughout your journey in life?
Oh gosh, step by step by step, by breaking open, you know, because I believe that so many of us are programmed. We have been programmed with systemic everything,
Right.
racism, sexism, prejudice, racial bias, all of it.
Yeah.
And like when we unravel each one layer by layer by layer by layer, we become more authentic human beings. And I have unraveled many, many, many layers of programming, I like to call it.
I know I asked you this earlier, I think, about like how you draw on the wisdom and the superpowers of your cultural background, because it's like the wisdom somehow just seems like all around us. It's lost. I'm looking for it. I'm always looking for that, actually. Is that?
Well, good. It's not lost. It
Yeah.
is not lost. It is in your bloodline, just like it's in my bloodline with my people. You know, we have resilience, great resilience in our communities. And that I am so grateful for. And we've got music, and we've got ceremonies, and we've got connection to the land. That's very, very important. But I also want to encourage my white brothers and sisters, my European, the settler community, is that you also have those ceremonies somewhere in your lineage. You just have to find them and remember them. You are children of this earth. You belong here, you know, as a child of earth. So she is your mother. And if you remember your stewardship of her, then you will find a sense of belonging to this planet, you know, and you will find camaraderie, you will find sisterhood, brotherhood with other nations on this planet, because we are children of the earth. And ultimately, our highest teachings in Indigenous cultures, that we recognize that we are all part of the circle, and everyone has to remember what they came to bring. Everyone shows up to the circle with their gift, with their offering. And if you can't remember yours, then it's your job to go find it.
Right. Less beautifully articulated.
It's there to be found, though.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. It's there to be found.
Right. So how, like, speaking of like systemic, you're an artist, singer, songwriter. How can we support you as an artist, you and continuing to tell your story in these systems that look like we don't know what the current sort of climate, how that's going to change everything. And I'm hoping for the better sooner rather than later. where we actually place some value on art, the importance of art in culture. It is so important,
Mhm.
in addition to the sports that, people are playing. But on this piece, how can we keep those things alive? I feel that are crucial.
That's a very good question. Um, Artists from all walks of life, from every nation on this planet,
Yeah.
artists are the ones that walk ahead in many ways. They live on the fringes a little bit, right? The
Yeah.
fringes of the systems. And they usually sing or paint or tell stories about what they see in the systems in the world. And that is so important, for because not everyone sees the world through a creative lens. Even though we're all creator beings, we're all children of the creator.
Yes.
We are creator beings. A lot of people don't necessarily see their gifts that way. And so they need the artists to translate what's going on in this world for them.
Mm-hmm.
And because words don't always do it, a visual representation can sometimes get through to the changes going on, or to the opening that needs to happen, or a music cuts through that linear brain and goes into the creative brain and goes, ah, I get it. A song can do it. Music can do it. So to me, the systems don't necessarily want to be dismantled. They will do anything. The system itself is self-regulating, is self-healing. Whether, it can be dismantled, but it does everything in its power to make sure that change doesn't happen. So, which means they're sophisticated. So if artists are responsible partly for dismantling the broken systems, not broken, what's the word I'm looking for? Systems that don't work for everyone, that are racist, sexist, ableist, genderist, discriminatory. If those systems are that, and the artists are shining a light in ways that encourage people to dismantle it, then the systems will do anything to silence that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you just think of what is valued in, and when we go back to the rise of the sacred feminine, the
Yes.
artists are in that feminine place, right? They're the ones that go deep into the unknowing, deep into the stillness, and find the answers, that find the wisdom that the ancestors offer. So if the systems are about doing, conquering, never stopping, like devouring, indulging, over consuming, if the system requires people to be like that, then the feminine or the artist or the environment or all those things are danger to that system. Which is why humans, one at a time, need to learn how to get quiet, need to stop doing. And which is why the pandemic has been so important, because it's been forcing people who don't want to stop to stop.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, they're given all the tools they need, and they start feeling their feelings, the fear and the grief that came through this pandemic, and the people, just reaching for tools they've never reached for before. The rise of the sacred feminine. The artists are leaders in that, because they show a way. An elder told me once that he looked at me and says, you are one of those artists that jumped onto the medicine road accidentally. And I'm like, because artists tend to go inward, tend to ask, tend to pray, tend to open up. And whether they use that language or not, they open up to
Yes.
that spirit world in
Yeah.
many ways, which
Yeah.
is where all the beauty and imagination and creativity lives. It's theirs for all our taking if we open up, if we access our sacred feminine self to access it. And so he said, yeah, you stepped onto the medicine road. And of course, I've never left.
Yeah, because you receive your guidance from that place, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, do you do this as an intentional, like, sort of meditation and time for yourself, or do you kind of walk through life sort of embodying that, or both?
Both. I definitely create time for it. I try to be in tune with my cycles, with the natural cycles of life, with a woman's cycles, with the moon cycles, with seasonal cycles. We have forgotten our rhythms as women, that we are rhythmic beings. We
Right.
of all, we follow cycles more than anyone. And when women are out of balance with the cycles of life, then our men are out of balance too. So when we get back into balance with the rhythms of the moon and the seasons and the day, the rhythms of a day and the rhythms of our body that says this is not a work day. This is a moon time day. This is a time to lie down and cry. This is a day to reflect. This is a day to play. That is a deep part of my life. I follow the rhythms, and there's days when work is impossible and deadlines have to just walk away.
Really?
Yeah, because they're false deadlines. The deadlines actually don't actually exist. And then the moment that those days are done, I'm like, am I back? Whew. And I'm back with power and passion and excitement. And because I followed, if I would have forced myself to go through on the days that I was not supposed to, that work probably all would have been discarded anyway.
Well, that takes an incredible amount of trust.
Deep, deep trust.
Yeah, I love that. Deep.
Deep trust. Because every system in place says is that it's wrong.
Yes, it does, doesn't it?
Financial, oh gosh, the finances, oh, whoa.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, when you're talking,
Deadline. Yeah.
so yeah, sorry. And now when you're talking about that, I know women in my life who are both spiritual and who would also say that they are more religious. And uh, there's a lot of people that would say that the religious model comes from more of a patriarchal model, pardon me. And so I've never actually really asked them this question, but it makes me think about how they are valued in sort of in the religious life that they have found the religious or their sort of value in it, in something like Catholicism, for example, with the things that, that they've done. And so people have said that, well, the world is suffering because there's no religion now. We've moved away from it. And what you're saying is that, and I'll say that this is that they'll say that, without it, then I wouldn't know how to survive in this particular climate or at any time in their life. And you're saying that obviously you get your guidance from the grandmothers and from the spirit and from that place of quiet. And I'm wondering where there is a meeting of that. Do you know what I'm saying? I've been questioning that a lot, because, yeah, I don't know.
That's a good question, because from what I've been taught,
yeah,
from what I understand from my elders and from others, and these are wise people that were some people in residential schools, and so they have seen the worst of religion. So
yes.
I'm not a Christian woman.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a religious woman. I'm a deeply, deeply spiritual woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally believe that everyone's spiritual path is their own. And they're ultimately your friends who find solace in religion. That's their path to God, to the Creator. That is their path, and that should be honored. Yeah. Where to me, the change, if there were to be a change that happened, which I think should happen, yeah, is the evangelical believing that others are wrong.
Yes.
Believing others need to be saved.
Yes.
That to me is when we move into dangerous territory.
Yes.
That is exactly the mindset that created the residential school systems. It is exactly the mindset that, and for your community, that killed the witches. It's
Right. Right. Yeah.
so it is when we believe someone else is wrong and they have to be saved to follow my spiritual way,
Hmm.
then we move into dangerous territory. Then we are no longer honoring everyone's contribution in the circle.
Right. Yeah.
You have every right to follow your spirit and follow the guidance you get to follow your God. You have every right to do that. That is a sovereign right that human beings have,
Hmm.
and is beautiful. Everyone who finds that in their own way, whether it's through religious or other ways, yoga, meditation, you name it, running, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter, whatever a single person's way in to their sovereignty, to their joy, to their spiritual lineage is correct for them and should be honored. It's when we start changing and we start trying to change others is where we get,
Hmm.
of course.
Yeah.
And that to me is where they no longer go together. They become violent.
Right. Right. I remember purchasing this cross. It was weaved actually, and it was from an Indigenous individual artist up the Sunshine Coast.
Mhm.
And she was so peaceful about, because she was talking about her elder who still is a Catholic, but
Mhm.
she weaved it together. There's this weaving of this cross, and I talked to her about how she felt about everything, and she didn't get too much into the details of things, but I was probably more like frustrated over the whole thing than she was. Just sort of my own, God, why is that? To hear that happen is just like mind-boggling to me. Like when I continue to learn about it more.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and I also heard a wise elder, because I also was very struggling with that for a very long time.
Right.
Because it's like, why would Indigenous people accept Christianity when it was shoved down their throat, right?
Yeah.
So, but a Christian man, very educated, 2 PhDs, he said, well, when you bring that belief system, and he was saying this to a primarily white audience, he said, when you bring that belief, you believe that Indigenous people don't have agency, that we don't have the ability to choose. And in a way, it puts us in a pan-Indigenous camp. Whereas if we did that to every Catholic is this,
Sure.
every white person is Catholic,
Sure.
you'd go, no,
Yeah.
we're not,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Because we don't, if we were the way settler people look at Indigenous as though we're all the same. And an elder said once, that is a racist way of thinking. Indigenous people are pan-Indigenous. We all believe the same thing. We all should fight for the same thing. We should all, has Europe ever agreed on anything,
Yeah.
right? From one country to the next. Well,
Yes.
Indigenous people have just as strong nations within our Turtle Island. We are
Hmm.
very unique sovereign nations that didn't get along with their neighbors all the time, like they had different belief systems. So if Europeans can't agree on anything, why would Indigenous people have to agree on everything,
Hmm.
right? There's things we have to put aside in order to fight the bigger fight, but we are allowed to have different opinions and different choices and different lifestyles and different beliefs. We are allowed that because we are human beings. So we, as someone who chooses, has agency to choose for themselves.
Well, this has been quite the conversation today.
It sure has.
Yeah. I hope that your career, your sort of purpose and the way you serve humanity as a speaker, as an actor, as a storyteller, and the leadership work that you're doing and the retreats, hopefully the upcoming retreats will manifest themselves sooner. Um, that I send you a lot of goodness in that world for you.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for sharing my worldview and the name of my company, Sacred Feminine Learning Lodge, and there's offerings there. So I thank you for shining that to your community. If people are called, they'll come.
Yeah, thank you. And your website is Andrea Menard, MENARD.com, if you want to learn more about Andrea.
And sacredfeminineLearningLodge.com too.
And take, okay, okay, all right, okay, okay, okay. Um, I'm really grateful for our candor today. It was really lovely. Thank you so much. And thanks for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Whatever called you forth today and whatever brought us together today, I'm incredibly grateful. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your courage in hearing words that don't always, land nicely. They don't always land easily. So I thank you for being willing to look at some of your historical privileges and understandings and belief systems, because it's those courageous moments of unraveling that will make the change we're looking for. So thank you as well.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, for me, I'm also, I want to be able to ask the question, right? Without being like, cancel culture. Right? Because that's also important that we do that for each other, no matter who we are. So anyway.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. All the very best.
Now I just might have a little bit of my chocolate.
Awesome. All right. Thanks. Thanks, everyone, and take good care of yourselves. Bye-bye.